So this lesson plan sprung from my desire to teach middle school children knowledge that would empower them to become more sustainable in their own lives or in the future. I remember at that age it was really difficult to get involved with the environment and just like in general. So I wanted to create a way for middle school students to get involved and possibly do something at home that is good for the environment. This lesson plan is designed to introduce students to the concept of composting and the key ideas behind it. While searching for resources, I came across this amazing guide called Do the Rot Thing, which was a booklet of short lesson plans created by the Vermont Central Waste Processing. And it just included short lesson plans and a bunch of worksheets about compost for all different ages. So these lesson plans were designed for mainly younger children. So what I did was utilize the provided worksheets to enrich the lesson plan that I had already formulated and just for some general information. I also created a pamphlet to provide a more visual representation of the basics of composting, as you see here. And for hopefully so students could have something that they would actually like hold on to and keep for if they really were interested in composting at some point. They have almost all the information they need to start and maintain a compost pile right here in the pamphlet. So at the beginning of this lesson, students will receive the compost critters information sheet to familiarize themselves with decomposer organisms. So this is that super cool little handout. So it has cute little drawings and just a general description of what these organisms are and what they do for a compost pile. So after teachers go over decomposers with this worksheet and just make sure students understand what decomposers are and what decomposition is, then teachers will really go into depth about how compost is nature's way of recycling and just explain more about decomposers and how composting actually works. Then teachers will explain reasons why people compost and why it's important for students to reduce their landfill contribution and impact. We really just want to reiterate here that to students that the negatives of landfills and just why composting is much more beneficial to not only the environment but local individuals. Then after this, students will bring in some lunch items. So if they pack their lunch or if they just have some scraps left over from lunch, you would want them to bring them in, and then they're going to do another little worksheet where they either actually use their food scraps to go through and fill this out, or they just mentally remember what they had for lunch and designate all the items, if whether they could reuse, recycle, compost, or landfill them, and then possible replacements for these landfill products. Excuse my dog. After this, the basics of composting will be introduced and explained thoroughly. So mainly this portion of things to include and how composting works. So we'll go over how there are browns, greens, air, and water necessary for a compost pile. So students want to get a good mix of browns and greens and then make sure their pile is staying moist and turning it to make sure that there is sufficient air for the microbes to keep working. After this, teachers will explain the difference between compost and vermiculture, or vermicomposting, which is just utilizing worms and other microorganisms to speed up the process of decomposition during composting. And the earthworms actually tunnel through the waste, and while they do so, they create tunnels which increases aeration, and they also simultaneously not turn everything, but distribute all the products evenly throughout the pile and make sure that they can decompose better. So after this, the teacher will gather all the food and other organic material that students brought in and that she provided, and cut them into pieces smaller than about half an inch. And this is to speed up the decomposition process and allow students to actually see the process begin, because it does usually take a while. You can leave a few pieces larger if you would like to showcase how food takes longer when it doesn't get that initial breakdown by a human or other organism before microorganisms get to work. So once you've done that, the teacher is going to create a new compost bucket or container by filling the container about halfway full with greens and browns with a approximately even mixture. And you can layer them as you go or just mix them. You can include a few non-biodegradable items like plastic or, bones or something to show students what will happen if these items are included in their compost and how it does not break down like the other items. As you go, you want to you can mist it if you have a mister, but you can also just drizzle it lightly with water to make sure the mixture is staying moist as you go. And then after this part, teachers are gonna ask the students questions about just about what questions they have about compost in general, and prod them for things like, why do we want the compost to remain wet? Get them thinking about how water affects the decomposition rate and why that possibly is. Have students record their predictions if they think they know why water affects compost this way, and then we'll find out if they're correct later. After this, you're gonna ask for volunteers, or you can just do it yourself if you don't have any volunteers. So you're gonna take the bucket you just made and pour it out on a tarp, and you're gonna have 2 pre-made buckets of compost for this lesson plan that hopefully you made at least a week or 2 prior to the lesson plan, and if you made them 2 weeks prior, you can stagger them up to 2 weeks apart to increase the difference between the piles and allow students to see really some further decomposition processes. So as you take these 3 piles, you're going to want to keep them separate and dump them out on a tarp, into separate piles. And then you can take your trowel or spade and just sift through there with the students all gathered around and just ask for them to point out any items that aren't broken down, or discuss what they see. And then after they have noticed everything and taken a really good look, every student, you want to discuss what happened with the older buckets and explain how bacteria and other decomposer organisms break organic material down into compost and back into soil. And then after this, you're going to reiterate why compost is so much more beneficial to humans and the environment than landfilling, as it creates useful leachate instead of poisonous leachate like landfills do when they mix all of the plant and food debris with, toxic things like batteries and stuff that's not made for human consumption. After this, you will ask students to identify possible factors that influence the rate of decomposition, like temperature, moisture content, etc. It also has this part about, more in depth of how composting and decomposition actually works. Although it is basically a light overview, since, decomposition is a very complicated process that requires a lot more science knowledge than typical middle schoolers have. It also has, how to care for the pile, because again, it's difficult to find this on the internet of information more than just how to start the pile, but, tips for maintaining your pile. And then, things I've learned over the years, like adding too much citrus peels can produce harmful leachate, that you shouldn't add animal waste because it makes it unfit for fertilizer as humans, which again is something I've seen very contested on the internet, where some things say you can, some things say you can't. So in this, I just wanted to provide a safe, fun way for students to, get involved with their local community and their local environment in order to grow and learn more about this world we live in.